Westeck Windows in Chilliwack. You have a brochure on your chair with some other information, I believe. Westeck in Chilliwack, that's where our main manufacturing plant is. We're a company of about 150 staff. Custom windows, custom doors, very custom windows and very custom doors. We have showrooms in Nanaimo and Victoria. We have a new showroom going into Kelowna right now, and we have a really beautiful showroom in Vancouver on Kootenay Street that if you get a chance you should check out. First things, cell phones please, if you could put them all on mute so that we don't interrupt. And so, Jaugelis, our speaker today, is a fenestration specialist with RDH Building and Engineering. He has a very keen understanding of commercial and residential glazing industry, fenestration product manufacturing, as well as industry standards, testing, certification programs in Canada and the US. He's been active in industry organizations such as American Architectural Manufacturers Association, the former Window and Door Manufacturers Association of BC, which is now the Fenestration Association of BC. He's on the Technical Services Committee of Fenestration Canada, an associate member of the CSA Committee A119, Performance Standards for Windows A440, and a member of the Enercan Energy Efficient Fenestration Steering Committee. So if you could please welcome Jaugelis.
Thank you, Terry, for that introduction. I think for those who may not realize it, I think Westeck does have a reputation in the industry. They've been very proactive in getting their products tested to the NAFS standard. And as I'll talk a bit later, some products like side hinge doors, it's a very challenging thing to do. So the industry's in various stages of coping with this standard, but Westeck is one of the companies that has been an early adopter and definitely committed to that testing program. So I'd like to thank them for sponsoring me and giving me a chance to speak to you, and I'm glad to see all of you out here. Just a couple questions at the start. How many of you were here at the morning session? Oh, quite a few. Okay, so you're trying to get the double-barreled, right? Okay, so we'll see there will be some overlap maybe between the two presentations, but maybe not. Second question is, in the audience here, how many of you are builders? Okay, and how many of you are architects? Ah, wunderbar. Great. Well, appreciate having you here. This presentation I'm giving you today is about an hour and a half. It's condensed from a 3-hour workshop that I give on this subject, where I spend about an hour and a half on NAFS standard, another hour and a half on the Canadian supplement with examples, hands-on examples, determining performance grades and so on. So we'll give you kind of the overview of these issues today to help you appreciate what's involved both with the standard, with the supplement, determining performance grades, and the challenges that people are having around those issues. And hopefully that'll be helpful to you, and maybe for those that were here for Murray's presentation this morning, it'll be a reinforcement of issues that he has talked about as well. NAFS and the building code. My speaking topic, I was going to cover a few other code-related subjects. We haven't seen a printed copy yet of the Vancouver building bylaw, so I can't say too much about that, except that we do expect that it's going to reference NAFS just as all the other provincial codes that are based on the 2010 National Building Code. That won't be new. We are expecting, for those of you that build in the Vancouver area, there are really tight energy efficiency requirements for windows in 1- and 2-family homes. They're looking for like a Energy Star Zone C level of performance. For 1- and 2-family homes in Vancouver, a U value of 1.4. The industry is aware of this because the city held consultation meetings with the window and door industry going back a year and a half or so, maybe 2 years. So the industry is pretty much aware that this is coming in their Vancouver building bylaw, and it'll take effect on building permits issued after March 30th, as I understand. So that's going to affect window suppliers, but it's going to mean that you probably won't find any sliding windows that meet those criteria. You're going to be looking at either triple glazed vinyl, very energy efficient products, triple glazed wood maybe, fiberglass. Some products may be able to reach those levels with dual pane glass, but it will still need 2 low-E coatings, one inside the glass, one on the surface of the glass. So there's going to be some new technologies coming to the market to make it possible to supply those kinds of products to the city. Those requirements will apply only to 1- and 2-family homes, as I understand, not to multifamily buildings at this point. With respect to the BC Building Code, there's a section 936 that is going to take effect December of this year, 2014. It's going to introduce U-value requirements for windows and glass doors. Currently, that has not been a code requirement. We have had the BC Energy Efficiency Act, but that wasn't enforced through building officials. And to be honest, there's probably half or more of the products built in this province do not comply with the BC Energy Efficiency Act for that lack of code level enforcement. But once that portion of the building code is formally in effect, we have the legislation in BC that requires windows and doors to be labeled with their energy efficiency properties. That U value is going to have to be provided by a third-party certified label to make sure that it's trustworthy information. And that's going to be the label that building officials will be looking at for code compliance. So again, that's something to think about as builders. You're going to have to check with your suppliers, just as you have to determine whether or not they're ready for the NAFS standard, whether or not they're going to be ready to meet those energy performance labeling requirements. I believe the U-value target under the Part 936 will be 1.8 watts per meter squared, a little bit lower than the Energy Efficiency Act. So that's kind of a roundup of some of the energy-related issues that are going to be taking effect over this coming year. But most of my talk today will be specifically on NAFS and the Canadian supplement, which together are used to select and test windows, doors, and skylights under the BC Building Code. So the topics we're going to cover are what is NAFS and why should I care, how we determine performance grades, the appropriate use and limitations of the Canadian supplement, and some thoughts on specifying with NAFS and the Canadian supplement for Part 9 and Part 3 buildings. So what is NAFS? Well, it harmonizes Canadian and American fenestration standards. The building code calls it the harmonized standard, and it really has its origins in 3 different standards, 2 from the US, 1 from Canada. There was an AMA 101, a WDMA IS2, and a CSA A440. You'll probably familiar with that number, but the 08 version is what we know as NAFS, the North American Fenestration Standard. NAFS is a lot easier to use than AMA, WDMA, CSA 101, IS2, A440, and so on and so on. It's kind of an unpronounceable name. It's called the Harmonized Standard in the Code. In the industry, we call it NAFS08 because there is a 2011 version that's been published, but it's not referenced by Canadian building codes. So for Canadian code compliance, the testing is to be performed and labeled to NAFS08 rather than NAFS11, even though the 2 standards are virtually identical. Technically, anything later than the 10 NAFS08 is not recognized by our codes. It was first introduced in the 2010 National Building Code. It's been in the 2012 BC Building Code since the fall of 2012. Even though we've had delays on enforcement of Part 9 buildings until the middle of last year, it's been in effect for Part 3 buildings right from the beginning of the introduction of that code. It's in the 2012 Ontario Building Code that just takes effect last month, the Vancouver Building Bylaw, the I-codes in the United States, and it's coming to the future Alberta and Quebec Building Codes. So we really have a cross-Canada and international standard here that covers all of North America. It covers more products than we've seen before. As you would imagine, it covers things like residential windows and sliding doors. But what is new, very new, is that it covers your conventional side hinge doors, residential especially. It covers various skylights on your roof. This is what's known as a tubular daylighting device or a sun tunnel, your factory glazed skylights. NAFS also covers commercial grade windows and architectural grade windows, and this is something that we haven't really had before in Canadian standards. We haven't really had a category for commercial window, but this is something that NAFS addresses. And categories of product we haven't really thought of in Canada, but that have been categories in the US. And here's an example of one of them that's called architectural terrace door. So there are specific testing and performance requirements for architectural terrace doors, which are designed to be balcony doors on high-rise buildings. So again, this is something we haven't really been accustomed to, but NAFS addresses that. Interestingly, folding doors, a very popular product here in BC, was not included in NAFS, mainly because at the time that the 2008 standard was developed, they didn't really have enough history with the product in order to figure out what the minimum test sizes and performance requirements should be for these things. But it is possible to test folding doors as special products under NAFS and to give them a performance rating for code compliance. NAFS actually addresses some 30 groups, categories of products, and lists each one of them here in a table, because each one of these products, whether it's a casement window, a side hinge door, a fixed window, a transom, an awning window, each one of these has performance class definitions within NAFS, minimum sets of test requirements to qualify these products at different levels of durability. You'll notice that there are two categories with an LW prefix, and these are limited water side hinge doors. I'll talk about those in a few moments. And NAFS kind of illustrates the different types of products. So you'll see that NAFS covers things we don't see here in Vancouver, such as vertically pivoted windows, horizontally pivoted, hinged rescue windows. A lot of categories of product that are used in the States, but not very common here. However, that just gives you an idea of the comprehensive nature of the standard. What is highly significant, especially to us in Canada and especially to us in BC right now, is the application of these requirements to side hinge doors. NAFS requires unprotected side hinge doors to have the same water and structural performance as windows. And when you look at it, it's logical, isn't it? If we expect this window to have a water tightness rating because it's on a lake and it's facing driving rain, and if it's got wind gusts of 60, 70, 120 miles an hour, we kind of expect the windows to do their job there, but we've kind of given doors a free ride. And NAFS is saying that that door, that window need to have the same air tightness, water tightness, and wind load resistance. However, NAFS does make an exception for protected doors, doors that are deemed to have a sufficient overhang protection to shelter them from driving rain can have what's called a limited water rating, which means a water rating less than what it needs to have if it was fully exposed. And a door could obtain a limited water rating by having absolutely no air pressure during the water test, just letting water wash over it and drip down, or some amount of air pressure, but it fails the test at a level lower than its performance grade. So limited water doors with protection, or doors that are fully able to handle the wind and the water just like windows. This has real implications for door design. It's safe to say that there's not a single door that you've been using in the market in the last 25 years that would pass these tests, as built, as bought. They fail structurally, they fail under water penetration, and to actually get doors that actually have a meaningful level of structural performance and water tightness requires significant R&D. What many of you don't realize is your typical insulated door has almost no wood structure inside it. The least expensive doors have just thin strips of wood on the edges and maybe a bigger lock block where the locks are. But the door slab itself has very little structural strength. And many manufacturers are finding that to get a decent structural rating or water rating, you've got to use multi-point locking hardware. The other option is to go with a much stiffer and stronger door slab, also more expensive. In some cases, some people are finding your traditional single point, passage set and deadlock will get you there. But you need to know that there is a difference between the doors that achieve these ratings and the ones that don't. They're likely to have different hardware, different sills, different weather strips. If they don't, you're probably just being sold the same old door they sold you last year, regardless of what label has been applied to it. So that's something you should be aware of, because you might be happy buying a door with a label that may or may not be true, but at the end of the day, if there's a problem, if there's a claim, if it gets rejected, you as a builder are going to be the one who's going to have to get an occupancy permit or get the door ripped out and replaced or whatever. So there is liability associated with providing products that do not comply with these new code requirements. They are challenging. The industry, many companies have stepped up to the plate and developed products that will meet these requirements. Guess what? They cost more because there's better components in them to make them perform. So for some people, that's a disincentive to use them. And there are people who are willing to supply products that don't meet those requirements. So the industry is still grappling with it, and hopefully the compliance will improve. But right now, it seems to be a bit of, there's a bit of everything out there in the market. Well, let's talk about what else is new under NAFS. We have a new rating system. Under the old A440, we're all familiar with ABC ratings, and we still have something like an A rating. We had air infiltration rated as A1, A2, A3 are fixed. And under NAFS08, we've retained A2, A3, and fixed. A1 is too leaky. The A2 and 3 definitions are equivalent to what they were before. But this is now called the air infiltration exfiltration level, not an A rating. We used to have water penetration resistance levels, B1 to B7. We now measure water penetration resistance in pascals ranging from 140 to 730 in 19 distinct increments. So we have the ability to specify intermediary levels of water penetration that we didn't have under B1 to B7, but it is a new rating scheme. Wind load resistance, we used to categorize windows from C1 to C5. We now talk about performance grade. And performance grade runs in increments from PG15 to PG100, also in 19 increments. We'll show you a table in a moment where that'll make more sense. So again, we're specifying this property, but with a new terminology. And performance grade is actually a little more than just wind load resistance, but the two are closely related.